Hey, this is Mark Dowsett with Real Property Management Instant Equity here in Tampa Bay. If you want to learn more about how to use your small axe to build an empire, you should listen to the Small Axe podcast by my good friend Nico.
Hey, guys, this is your boy Nico, your host of the Small Axe Podcast. Hey, this show is dedicated to helping you become the best multifamily real estate investor that you can be. Now, whether you want to be an active or a passive investor, this show will give you all the resources you need to help sharpen your axe and build your own personal empire. So you know what? Sit back and relax and enjoy this show. And hey, if you find value in it, I would love for you to subscribe, leave a 5-star rating, and write a review. I love you guys.
Hey, Small Axe community. I hope you guys are doing well. It's a beautiful morning up here in New York, rainy, hazy, cold, but I'm hanging out with my man, Mark Dowsett, who's down in Tampa, and he's kind of living that life of the better weather than I am. Mark, welcome to the show, man.
Awesome. Hey, thanks for having me. Appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah, so I did not read a bio for you, and I was kind of hoping you can kind of give the listeners some sort of background of what you do, where you come from, and a little bit more about your story.
Yeah, absolutely. So I've been in investment real estate for about 7 years now. My business partner and I are both from Michigan originally and determined that Tampa would be a great market to get started in. And so obviously we thankfully hit that one right, but came down here about 7 years ago. I didn't really know anybody, just got my start. And from there, built a business up from the ground up. We manage about 300 units now. But my real experience was back in industrial sales and decided that I really didn't want to work my way up the corporate ladder. I really wanted some passive income and decided that property management would be a great way for me to learn how to do the investment side and then eventually get in on my own. So that's really how we kind of got started in the business.
Well, it's funny, I was thinking about this yesterday, but the listeners might not know this. So you are our property manager as well. And we chose you for a lot of reasons because you just, you really stuck out when we did our interviews. But I was thinking about this yesterday, Mark, that I figured that you went down there to do investing in real estate, but you ended up doing the property management side, which I feel is a really challenging job. Do you have any reservations about jumping into property management?
To be honest, I think my business partner really helped me along with that. So he actually has a business in Michigan. I got to kind of learn from him a little bit in that field. But to be honest, I was 24 at the time. I got an opportunity to run my own business with the idea long-term of investing. And so I kind of just jumped in with both feet, didn't really know what to expect, but thankfully was able to really lean on that experience there. But I agree, it's looking back, it's kind of a wild thing to do just with not really knowing what to expect. But thankfully, I think it really helped build a foundation of understanding exactly what it took to manage a successful investment property. And in turn, being able to do that for myself. And so that's kind of where you and I have come together, where we've been doing some of our own apartment investing in greater Tampa Bay. We got to know each other, and it sounds like, that's really what hopefully differentiated us. And that's the way that we present ourselves, where we don't only look at it from the management point of view and the compliance, but we also look at it from what's the return on the investment. And I really lean on my property management background to help forward my own investment strategy. So it's been kind of nice to have that foundation.
Yeah, our reason for choosing you wasn't only based on the fact that you were also an investor. It was also just the way you carry yourself, the way you speak, and the way you were willing to and open to letting us have, weekly calls and constant contact, which is overbearing for you sometimes, I can imagine. But I appreciate that. And we'll get into a little bit more of that in a little bit. But you also, I feel like there is a wall between the property manager, right? You're on the front line as opposed to us, the owners, in this scenario where we're like saying, hey, Mark, we want this, we want X, Y, and Z done. And we're not dealing with the day-to-day and the people actually living there. I feel like it's a challenging thing to go say, have somebody tell you, hey, we want X rent, or we want this to happen. And then you have to go tell a family X, Y, and Z. How is that?
Yeah, that is the challenging part of the job for sure. You deal with a lot of different personalities, whether it's in your office, whether it's the residents, whether it's the owners. So it's managing how to approach that. And thankfully, my staff and I, we really try to take that personal approach where we understand where they're coming from, but we try to at least give them a holistic view of, hey, this is exactly why this is happening. Whether it's lately, it's been obviously property tax and insurance rates. So when we talk to our residents, we let them know, hey, look, we're not trying to overly increase. We're just trying to meet where the market's at, just from the owner's perspective. So we try to really, instead of just demanding and having really a very authoritative, put the hammer down, we try to have a conversation, at least let them know this is why this is happening. And I find it has a really good response, just taking a little bit more of a human approach to it.
Yeah, cool, man. But I feel like it takes a certain personality to be a property manager. I don't feel like I could do it. Did you find yourself struggling at all with that?
Personally, I think it was a little bit of a learning curve if you're not able to stick to the guidelines that you establish, which was challenging 7 years ago when I got my very first property. I find that people can certainly take advantage of you. And that's where I feel like relying on the lease, relying on the landlord tenant law, I think that that's what you have to lean on. And at the end of the day, if you give someone an inch, they'll certainly take a mile. But as long as you set your expectations that, hey, this is the contract that you signed, this is what we're supposed to do. I think as long as you really oblige or kind of align yourself with that, that's what's really helped me become more successful. Whereas in the beginning, with my first property, obviously you hear the sob stories, you want to help out, but at the end of the day, it's just business and you have to follow your contract.
Yeah, it's tough. Do you ever see yourself exiting? I know that you are growing, you're acquiring more team members. Do you ever see yourself kind of taking a back seat at some point?
I think down the road, I would love to, but I know I'm so involved. So just so you've got kind of a backstory on what our overall vision looks like. So I'm the local partner here in Greater Tampa Bay, but we have a larger group where we're acquiring other offices in Fort Myers, in Mobile, Alabama, Austin, Texas, and we're looking for additional partners like myself. And so even though I'm involved in those other entities and we're working on building out SOP for that, I'm still involved here in Greater Tampa Bay. And so I think I would love to eventually exit, but to be honest with you, I think for the long term, I'm going to be here. This is the business that I've built from the ground up, and I'm really prideful of that. And so I think, when I'm old and gray, for sure, I'd love to have somebody do with the business development management, but I think it's all about building a team around you. And I think we've built a really solid foundation with our virtual team, with our operations managers, and now we have some great property managers locally. So I think even though my role may become smaller, I will always be involved just because I'm very prideful of what we've got going on here in Tampa.
Cool, man. Cool. And you also are still looking for investment properties. And
we are.
How's that going?
Well, and funny you mentioned that. It's been an interesting process. I know our first investment came right before COVID, which was perfect timing for the market. And I mean that sarcastically. It's been a wild ride, but we are in the market. I know right now our biggest challenge has just been finding good deals. With prices going up, cap rates have obviously compressed. And then like you and I have talked about before, insurance rates are going up. We're dealing with higher interest rates. So there are a lot of market challenges, but I'm finding that there's definitely deals still out there. Personally, I like to have a hands-on approach, and I like the idea of investing when rents are low, increasing the rents by making renovations to bring it up to the market value. And so even though you might have to get your hands a little dirty, you might have to deal with some overall repairs or delayed maintenance, I think it's well worth that type of investment. And that's where our approach has really come, rather than going turnkey, which you can certainly have some great success with. But at least from my perspective, I find that the returns, you're able to kind of leverage it to a degree where you can improve your returns by kind of getting your hands dirty and finding those lower valued properties and making them market rates.
Yeah, I agree. And, a lot of times, well, I'm seeing a mix. I'm seeing some of those deals out there. However, they're still somewhat overpriced. I mean, we say that, but then I talk to some of my friends who say, they're not necessarily overpriced. They're just overpriced for us in our business model, where some institutional buyers or people that have maybe 1031 exchanges are coming in with cash. They have different means or different needs and return expectation. So for us in our business model, things are it's just challenging. And I think it's always been that way. If it was easy, then people would be buying and selling deals left and right. And it's just not the case.
Absolutely.
Okay, cool, Mark. So, when we were looking for a property manager, we ended up doing a bunch of interviews with different property managers. And I know that my listeners are also out there doing the same thing. So my question for you is, as an investor who buys a property and is looking for a third-party property manager, what are some traits that they should be looking for in a property manager?
Yeah, I certainly think willingness to lend information is kind of a number one. Someone that's a little bit more guarded with what they're providing their clients, I think could be a challenge. So for myself, that's one of the reasons why I always make sure to project if there's anything that I can do to help, whether it's with the underwriting, whether it's with questions on who we're using as vendors, because you may have some out-of-state investors that just don't know the market. I think coming forth with information is certainly a bonus. I know that's something that we look for in some of our out-of-state properties that we've done some underwriting on when we're looking for property managers. It's just we want someone that feels more a part of our team rather than someone that's just looking to make a management fee and kind of away they go. So that's something that I personally look for. And that's the approach that I take whenever I present myself to our potential investor clients, but also somebody that has potential and as far as processes in place, someone that's not just a fly by night, what's your SOP? What does your internal team look like? Do you have 24/7 maintenance? What does it kind of look like there? And then as far as other things I would recommend looking for would be somebody that has a similar background or experience to what you're looking for your investment type. And so I think we've already kind of talked about the investment strategy where my firm and myself, my business partner, have experience investing in multifamily, but not just investing in any old multifamily. We do the renovations. And so I think having some background in that type of work can play for a specific type of investor. So I really think it comes down to finding somebody that is not only willing to kind of become a part of your team and share information, but also has the experience and that background for what your investment might be looking for.
Yeah, great advice. Now, you mentioned SOPs twice now. What is that?
Standard operating procedures. So, for example, when I have someone give me a notice, I have a set of tasks that various team members do in order to get things done in a timely manner, make sure that we're legally compliant. So that way we post notices on the proper timeline. So basically, it can be anything and everything that we do on a day-to-day basis. We have a process in place, team members that know that they're supposed to be handling specific tasks.
Cool. Thank you, Mark. And when asking about fee structures, are there different types of fee structures?
There are, yes. So as far as management goes, if you're a single family homeowner, at least in Greater Tampa Bay, there's a wide range of fees. Typically, it's going to come down to your marketing fee. So your leasing and marketing. It's also going to come down to your management. Is there a maintenance markup? Are there renewal fees? And I know for Tampa Bay, there's a wide range that you can find out there, but those are going to be your main fee structures. And when it comes to larger investments, those fees are usually discounted. I know every company is different, but we've found that in order to leverage ourselves, it's oftentimes worthwhile, like I said before, making yourself a part of the team and working with the investors to potentially lower those fees in order to make sure that the returns make sense for everybody. Because at the end of the day, I want to make sure that my investors are successful. And if it means, a fraction of a percentage point difference, hey, at the end of the day, I want to make sure we're all successful there. So we always, with my firm, open it up for a conversation because we find that lends to kind of coming to a meeting of the minds and having the right feel for everybody.
Yeah. And then, the investors like us are more apt to see that you're willing to work with us, so we're more apt to hire you in the future and build your business as well.
Yeah, absolutely. We don't want to have a short-term line of sight. We definitely want to look for that long-term relationship because at the end of the day, if we're successful in the short term, it should hopefully help us in the long term.
Awesome. You know what? Let's unpack a little bit. So let's say, people are like saying, when I get a third-party property manager, I have to pay 8% or something like that. Let's just say that we're paying 8%. What is that 8% based off of?
It's based on the overall rent. So, for example, if you're receiving $1,000 a month for rent, you're paying $80 in management per month for that specific unit.
Great. Now, what about like other fees? You mentioned there could be a maintenance markup. There's like some leasing fees. Can you explain? Let's talk first about leasing fees, and then we'll keep going.
Absolutely. So with a marketing and leasing fee, you're going to be covering, or basically the management company is going to be either potentially covering referral fees to agents that find the listings for you or find the potential renters for you. Also, it's going to cover any sort of marketing on third-party websites, background checks, application screening, the whole lease signing process. So basically from marketing, including photos, all the way to lease signing, at least with my firm, that's what the marketing and leasing fee will cover.
Okay, cool. And how much is a leasing fee typically?
So in Greater Tampa Bay, it can range, I would say, between 50% of the first month's rent to 100%. So it just depends on which firm you decide to go with.
Now, let's say that's for a brand new lease. Let's say somebody's renewing their lease. What do we charge for that?
Yeah, so at least based on my experience in kind of shopping the market, I've seen some companies do a flat fee. So some companies may do, depending on if it's hundreds of units, you may see a fee maybe at $75, $99 for a lease renewal, all the way up to 25% of the first month's rent for that new lease cycle. So it just depends on what the overall scale looks like, but also depends on the company, obviously.
Gotcha. And let's talk a little bit about when people are going, signing a lease, right there, or let's say they have to pay something, right? Don't they have to pay to get a background check and all that? What is that fee for the tenant, the prospective tenants?
That's a great question. So at least with my firm, we have $100 application fee, and that goes to pay the background check. Obviously, as a part of the owner side, we include that as part of our marketing and leasing fee, but it is a way for us to at least cover our cost with the residents, just because not every not every applicant turns into a resident. And so at that point, that $100 application fee will help cover all the costs associated with that background check.
We can't, as owners, consider that income because we don't get it. Is that right?
Correct. At times, it may still show up on your 1099s at the end of the year, but it will show up in the cash flow statement. So it just depends on how the accounting is set up. But you're correct. I would not count that as income for the homeowner.
Great. Now, you mentioned maintenance markup. What is that?
Yeah, so that is oftentimes where a property management company has built a relationship with a vetted vendor. And we basically take the invoice that we receive and we mark it up a specific percent. And those percents can vary quite widely. Just depends on the local firm. But oftentimes, at least in my experience, we've built such strong relationships with our vendors where they not only give us preferred pricing and lead times, but even with that markup, the end consumer, the owner, is oftentimes saving money as if they were to go out and do this on their own. So it's a way for us to kind of recoup some of our lost expense, but also leverage our relationship and still save our clients some money.
Gotcha. So when somebody's asking or talking to their property manager, they should be speaking about, are there maintenance markup fees?
Yeah, I definitely would. And I wouldn't necessarily let that scare you off either, just because if anything, it's showing you that, hey, this property manager is legitimate and they are building relationships with local vendors. I know for myself, oftentimes I would much rather have a responsive vendor that's obviously helping out the property manager than maybe saving a little bit of money trying to do it on my own. So I would much rather have those systems in place. And like I said, when we look out of state, that's what we look for in our property managers as well.
Are you looking at a state?
We are. So because we are purchasing a office in Mobile, Alabama, we're starting one in Austin, Texas. And we have another in Charlotte, North Carolina. What our overall model is to purchase multifamily properties around those offices. So that way we can kind of funnel them to ourselves and grow ourselves through our own investment.
That's awesome, man. Congratulations.
Thank you. I appreciate it. It's been a long time coming.
Oh, cool. And all right. So back to these questions. This is great, man. My listeners are going to be loving this. All right. So now let's say they decide on a property manager, they like the fee structure, they agree with everything. Do they have to pay advertising, or does that go through you, or how do we find leads? Like, how we got you on now, how are we going to, do I have to go cold calling people? Hey, do you want to come to my apartment? Like, how do we find tenants?
You know what? If you want to come on staff and you want to help me with that, you're more than welcome to. But no, so that's all included in your marketing and leasing fee, at least with my firm. So I know a lot of times in the underwriting, when I'm looking at deals, you see the advertising, you see the leasing, and they're broken out. But realistically, at least with my firm, my investors don't have to worry about paying that. That's just all included within my marketing and leasing fee. That being said, like if you do end up providing us with some leads, fantastic. But thankfully, we've got those systems built in place where if we're priced appropriately, the leads will come. We syndicate to all the major platforms, Facebook Marketplace, Zillow, Truly, apartments.com. We're out there. But yeah, that's what I would recommend. And that's what's in place.
Cool. All right. So now there's so much to talk about here, Mark. Like, this is incredible. And honestly, we've already been on for like almost 20 minutes, but I have so many questions.
Worries.
I'm going to shoot them to you.
Of course.
All right. So is there a difference between managing or let's say, what's your sweet spot and where do you want, like, what's unit count? What is your sweet spot for unit count?
Yeah, so I would say for me, we saw obviously there's profitability at different points, but I think for me, my ideal goal for Greater Tampa Bay would be about 500 units. I see property management companies grow tremendously past that, and I think that would be fantastic. But I would feel a level of success at 500, and especially if we're looking to, my goals personally are to purchase 2 apartment complexes a year. So I'm thinking, hey, if we can have a management company around 500 and we're making some of our own acquisitions, I'm very happy with that. But obviously, hey, the more the merrier. I'd love to grow my team even more, but I think I'd be very happy about 500.
Great. And size per property is really what I was going after. What do you go
Oh,
for,
gotcha.
smaller, mid-range, or 100 unit plus? Like what kind of size?
Yeah, so I think our sweet spot has really been the small to medium apartment complexes. And what I mean by that is anywhere from 15 to 60 units. Anything larger than that, and you're going to start to look to have on-site management, which is certainly doable. It's just a little bit different of a pricing structure. And usually the employees that we bring on are paid directly by those properties rather than through our management company. So I find that if in order to maintain our current business model, anywhere from 15 to 60 units is realistic. That small to medium apartment. That being said, if we get the opportunity to manage a larger community, 100 plus, fantastic. We can certainly do that. But it is a little bit different of a model where you have a dedicated employee for that location rather than someone that manages a portfolio.
Yeah, great. So as a buyer, we're also looking in that 10 to 60
Mhm.
unit range. And then, 60 plus is where what we call the tweeners, right? It's in between. Do you need an on-site maintenance guy? Do you need an on-site manager? And explain a little bit about the difference, because at that point, so we said there was an 8% fee, right? Management fee. That's going to go
Yep.
down at that point, but there are other fees that go up. So can you explain that a little?
Yeah, absolutely. So you're exactly correct. So typically, and each market's going to be different. So just putting that out there, but typically that management fee will go down significantly. And so you're going to be looking at maybe a 2% management fee, something along those lines, very, very low. But in turn, you are now, if you're a larger apartment, you're incurring the costs of the insurance for the employee that's on site, the employee's salary, potentially maintenance, any sort of expense that's going to go into having that person on site, but also including, now you're going to have the internet, you're going to have utilities for the office. You may either have an office that's existing, or you may end up converting a unit into an office. So you may have a potential loss of one of your marketable properties. So there are some changes that go into play there, but management definitely decreases. But obviously now you're the one that's incurring the marketing costs, the employee costs. And so that's what I find that's interesting, especially with some of these smaller deals. They almost have underwriting of the larger deals because you see the advertising, you see the insurance costs, but at the end of the day, they're not appropriate for that pricing style. And so that's where I'm seeing, even on those smaller deals that you're focusing on, there's opportunities to save money overall because those management fees aren't appropriately priced. So it's just kind of something to pay attention to.
Awesome. Thank you, Mark. Let's talk a little bit about what you see on your own properties. As far as expense ratio is concerned, Michael Blanc is always preaching you got to do underwrite with 55% expenses, which I feel is a little high, but possible, right? Do you know more or less where your expense ratio is?
I haven't looked at it in a little while, but I know we're right in that sweet spot. I would say we're not in the sweet spot, but I know we're between that 40 and 50%. So we actually went through the Michael Blanc training as well. And I think you're right. I think it's a little bit high, but I think he goes conservative and wants you to make sure to overestimate before kind of back yourself into a deal. So the last time we were reviewing that, I believe we're between 40 and 50. There's always going to be expenses that come up, deferred maintenance, issues where, you've got old cast iron in Florida. Now you have to replumb. So there's definitely those issues. So I'm kind of of the same mindset that Michael is, where I like to kind of over exaggerate, or not over exaggerate, but overestimate my expenses. So that way I can kind of back into a deal a little bit more safely. So when we perform better and we don't have as much maintenance, we're still able to maintain that profitability.
Yeah, it's hard to find a deal though at 55% expense. I've never been able to
Right.
find one that one, but
Especially in this market. Yeah.
right. But then what I noticed also that the millage rates are very different in the greater Tampa MSA. So for example, like, you could find a millage rate of like 20 or 0.2 or whatever, however you in central Tampa, but then in Lakeland where we are, we're at 15, so there is a significant difference in taxes there, as well as insurance is different, apples to apples of square foot. And well, it really depends on the building and whether or not we're in a flood zone, but we're not in a flood zone in our property in Lakeland. Insurance went up, but it didn't go up to the degree that certain other properties did go up in Tampa of a similar construction and type and year, which I don't know why.
That's a good question. I know there's been a couple things that we've been looking at lately. There's been a few deals out in St. Petersburg that we've been looking at, and we've seen a dramatic increase. So I'm not sure if that's a level of proximity to the ocean versus just flood zone in general. I know the hurricane itself that came through last year did scare off a lot of folks in the investment world, and I'm not sure if that's led to some of the insurance fallout that we've seen. So I'm not sure if it's just location to the ocean, but I agree with you. I think the farther away you get, we're starting to see that not necessarily you're not jumping up to the levels of Tampa, but what we are seeing is that the rents are starting to increase to the rates of Tampa. So just your property, for example, the one that we purchased a couple of years ago is you guys are on pace to be right where we're at. And we purchased a couple years prior. So you're definitely seeing a faster growth in Lakeland. And I think we're starting to see that in just Florida in general, where some of these metro hotspots, obviously the rents have dramatically increased, and we're starting to see that kind of flood out throughout the rest of Florida. So to be honest with you, I wouldn't be surprised if some of these other markets that may be a little undervalued, Lakeland, Plant City, Dade City, I wouldn't be surprised if we start to see the rents in those areas increase dramatically as well, just to mirror what we're seeing in greater Tampa Bay as the natural residents get priced out of the area and look to move outside. So that's kind of what I'm projecting, and we're starting to see that like we saw in Lakeland.
Yes, awesome. But now my question is, and I don't want to get specific on a deal because we're looking also in St. Pete, and that's actually what I was speaking of when I saw higher insurance. So I'm looking at some deals in St. Pete right now, and the square footage is 750-ish for a 2-bed or 780 or something like that, and very dependent on the area of St. Pete. And I love St. Pete, but there, I might have to connect with you offline because I don't necessarily want to give away too much on this property, but
sure.
they're looking at like 1,800 for a 2-bed, which seems reasonable, but can we push it more is the question. How much more can we push? Because with these crazy insurance rates that essentially doubled in a lot of these areas, we need to make up for that somewhere, and it's got to be in the rent, unfortunately, or else the deals just don't make sense at all. So can we push more than 1,800, do you think, on a 2-bed, 750 square foot in close to Old Northeast, but not in Northeast?
Yeah. That is a really good question. I can certainly pull our active comps and just see, where our current residents are. I know we do manage heavily in St. Pete in that area, so we can certainly go and look at our active leases. But what I am seeing is with St. Pete, the rents are certainly higher than Tampa. So I think for what you'd get a 2-bed 2 or a 2-2 for in Tampa, you're not getting that in St. Pete. You're getting much more. That being said, I'm kind of curious, just like you are, what that cap might be. I know we do have some 2-bed, 2-baths that are $1,895, but that was a lease that was written 6 months ago. So I could definitely take a look for you specifically for that one. But I agree, there are some concerns. That being said, I know we're looking at a deal in St. Pete right now as well. And it seems like it'd be a great opportunity just based on the growth, but how much growth is still out there is kind of the big question.
Oh, I know, but there's still people moving there. There's still going to be a demand that, Florida there's going to be like 25 million. I think they just hit 22 million recently of population, and it's continuing. So we got to understand that, and we got to have faith in Florida as a market. What we need to be worried about is the rising insurance and whether or not government is going to step in and kind of help out if possible, or there are going to be more carriers that come back to Florida, which is not necessarily too likely. And then how far can we push rents? So with pushing rents, when you are looking for tenants, right, and you're marketing, for tenants, is there a ratio of expenses that they can afford? Like, how do you underwrite a tenant?
That's a great point. So when you're looking at residents, there's typically a good way to look at it. And most property management companies that I've experienced look for income to be at least 3 times their monthly rent. And so that way you have a good idea of, okay, let me look at their expense to debt or their debt to expense ratio. If they have 4 car loans and they make just 3 times, realistically, are they going to be able to make this rent payment on time? So when we're doing our due diligence on a resident, we're making sure that, hey, what does their income actually look like? What is their expenses that we can visibly see on their credit report? What do those actually look like to make the best decision? But we're also reaching out to previous landlords to verify, did this resident pay their rent on time? How did they leave the property? Especially if that rent is similar to what we're offering, because at that point, hey, if over the last several years, they made their rent payments on time and it's very similar to ours, we may have a good resident here. At the end of the day, someone can look great on paper. They can make a ton of money and they can end up not being a great resident that ends up not paying rent. But I definitely think it comes down to looking at what their overall income looks like and then any expenses or debt that they have on their credit report, just to get a good feel on if they can even afford the place. But as far as looking at that and then deciding what to offer for rent, that's kind of the challenge. That's where my firm likes to start high and work our way down. If we're not getting a good response, within a week or two, we're updating that price to try to reflect it. There's different ways to build in potential revenue. I know we have clients that use the RUB system where they bill back for utilities. Granted, it's not listed as rent, but it can be treated as income. So there's different ways to try to build back some of that profitability. But at the end of the day, it's all about looking at the specific market and trying to tailor it to what's out there.
Yeah, I've heard and found that it's helpful to, let's say, have a slightly lower rental rate, but adding fees on top of that, like RUBS or some other types of fees that we can charge to get more income from the tenants. It's kind of like, they're looking at it a little differently. Well, my rent is a little lower. I can afford these extra fees, let's say.
Exactly.
Cool. Mark, I know we're kind of out of time, but this is a broader question and this question comes up for a specific reason. So I have friends that are limited partners in deals across the US. And the majority of these larger syndicators that they are LP investors with have been pulling back on distributions for a number of reasons. One of them is their interest rates got shut up. They had floating rate debt and they just can't afford to make distributions at this time. Another reason that I'm seeing is occupancy and delinquency. So occupancy is down, delinquency is up in many markets across the United States. Could it be due to the recession? We don't know necessarily, and I'm not going to go there, but it's up in certain areas. Is it up also to what degree in Tampa?
That's a great point. So that is something that I have noticed a slight uptick in, especially in delinquency. I think there's a couple of factors there. I think obviously we had COVID, and I hate to even bring that up, but a couple of years ago still, and they established resident assistance programs that have only recently stopped working. They would just stop getting the funding. And so at that point, once that happened, we noticed some of our residents were starting to fall delinquent again. And so as a result, we're kind of getting the feeling that some residents in specific properties may have become accustomed to receiving that type of assistance. And at this point, didn't plan for this, hey, it's going to be gone and now I have to pay my entire rental value. So we are certainly seeing some of that. It's really unfortunate, but there are still assistance programs out there. That's why whenever we do have a resident that's delinquent, we always make sure to promote. For Tampa Bay, there's a company, or not a company, but an organization called 211, which can help even if it's not for a loss of income. You can have a death in the family, you can have other issues that come up, and they can step in and help you with assistance. But at the end of the day, we are starting to see that creep back up. And I think it all comes down to compliance at the end of the day. So in case you're not aware, with the CARES Act, and especially if you have resident, or if you have properties that are supposed to be monitored by the CARES Act, basically what you have to do is we now have a 30-day notice. So whereas before we could post a 3-day notice of non-payment, now it's 30 days. And so what my firm has taken is a little bit more of a hard-nosed approach in order to maintain that we're not continuing to push out delinquency. What we're doing is if a resident doesn't pay their full rental value for February, for example, by February 20th, we're not going to accept any partial payments. And so at that point, they need to pay their full rental value, including March's rent, before we basically allow them to accept, or before we accept their payment. That way, rather than having them pay their full February rent at the end of the month, and now they're delinquent for March, hey, if you can't pay your February and your March, then we won't accept your payment and we'll move forward with that notice of non-payment, which will now expire because it's that 30-day. If that makes sense at all, we're just trying to adapt to the market conditions in order to minimize the delinquency for our clients, because we are starting to see this creep up.
Yeah, I think that's a very, very strong way to approach it and a really intuitive and smart way to do it. I appreciate that.
Of course, absolutely.
Man, time is up, Mark. I could literally talk for an hour with you.
Me
so
too.
Many questions.
It's easy to do.
I have so many questions, and I know my listeners are going to have a lot of questions. So I'll do my final question, and then I will have you give some sort of a way of people contacting you. So let's imagine, Mark, it was 100 years from now. You have great-great-grandchildren. They're running around. They're happy. They have a bunch of dogs around them, rescue pets, and they're hanging out with this beautiful community down in Florida. And they wanted to write a book about you. What would you want them to title this book?
That's a great question. Only one that I've had a few minutes to prepare for. So, but no, I would definitely call it Put Your Best Foot Forward. And that's a lesson I learned very on in my career, where my business partner actually met me while I was doing a rehab with my dad at a property that he owned. Got to know me. I was, sweaty, shirtless, doing some demolition, and got to know me. And little did I know that was going to turn into my business partner, which led into me moving to Florida, which led into this great business that we've built together. So you just never know who you're going to meet. And so it's all about putting your best foot forward. And so that's something that I live by every day.
Yeah, to take everything as an opportunity, right? I mean, you never know what can come your way. So just be open, willing to be your best self at all times. I love it, Mark. Thank you.
Of course.
All right, let's do it. So how can people reach you?
Yeah, so my company's name is Real Property Management Instant Equity Solutions, which is a mouthful. Instant Equity Solutions is our parent company, but if you Google Real Property Management Leaders as well, there's several different ways. We all have them linked back to RPM Instant Equity Solutions. But either way, that's a great way to reach us. We're here locally in Tampa, and like I said, we're also in several other markets. I'm not sure if you want me to include my personal information, but I would say as far as Google goes, Real Property Management Instant Equity is a great way to find me.
Yeah, no problem. You can include whatever you want or not include whatever you want, it's fine. Some people
I
give their
guess
cell
so.
phones. Some people give like their, they say FaceTime me, so whatever you feel
Sure.
comfortable with.
Yeah, so our main office line is 813-445-4619. If nobody answers, you'll get prompted to leave a message, but it'll get forwarded over to me for any new business or just some owners that wanted to ask questions. Like I said in the beginning, I'm very much of the mindset of trying to align myself with any investor, and I always want to make sure to be an open book. So if they have questions, I want to be here to be a resource. But yeah, like I said, Real Property Management Instant Equity. Would love to love the opportunity, and I appreciate you having me on.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Mark. It's been a real pleasure hanging out with you and talking to you. I know that you're so busy, so I truly do appreciate your time. And I'll be chatting with you later today. So you have a great day.
Awesome. Thanks, Nico.
Hey, Small Axe community. I would like to say thank you for listening to another episode of this podcast where we show you how to use your small axe to build a lasting empire. Now, if you like what you heard, it would mean the world to me if you could leave me a 5-star rating and write a written review. Hey, let's take it one step further and share this podcast with someone that you feel could benefit from it. And until the next episode, keep sharpening those axes.